Our first speaker today reminds us that stories are what guide and lead change. Caren Zucker is here. She is an Emmy-nominated journalist, television producer, director, and with a storied career in journalism. Over 25 years, she's told powerful stories, but maybe none more critical to our mission today than that of her own personal story and her family's journey in the autism community. For many of us, her family's story has been a source of motivation, has been a source of inspiration. And so she's here today to share her story, as well as help us understand why and how stories will help advance a world where well-being wins for all. Caren, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Billy.
Thanks, Katie. Caren, as the Executive Director of Proof Positive, I am thrilled that you agreed to be part of our International Day of Happiness. Thank you so much for coming. I think your own story is compelling, but the way you tell stories for the rest of us have truly changed some of our lives and perspectives. So thank you again for coming. Katie,
thank you, really. Thanks for having me.
Katie gave you a great introduction. I don't think I've ever gotten to say Emmy Award winning, so that's kind of fun. But can you just kind of, from your own perspective, share a little bit about your background, a national news producer to someone who's really become a voice around autism awareness and acceptance? Can you kind of share with the crew how you perceive that for yourself?
Sure. I started working at ABC News in 1984. And I was a producer, and I loved traveling around the world and telling stories. And I went to the Olympics in the Philippines, and it was a great job. But it was also a way to sort of do mini documentaries, I always felt like, because they were stories, and the best journalism, I think, is stories. And then in 1996, my son was diagnosed with autism. And that changed the journey in a really, really big way. And I just sort of shifted focus. And I didn't really do it consciously. It was, I was a mom. There was nothing out there on autism. Nothing was on the networks at all. In fact, my partner, my correspondent, John Donvan, who I had been working with him in the news division. And he was a great storyteller, the best at ABC. And I said, will you tell stories with me about autism, and that's in the days that nobody knew anything about it. And the network let us do that. And we had a series called Echoes of Autism. And, that became, my profession in a way.
So you shared that you felt like nothing was out there, especially in your kind of channel, right? Like you're looking at where you go for information. Why did you think that storytelling was important? Certainly there was things in the medical literature, there was, documentation in peer-reviewed journals and things like that. But why did you think it was important for storytelling for the public and kind of humans to understand about that?
I think that when people hear about a situation and they learn about a situation, even if it's not their situation, and they start to understand it, and then they can empathize with it. And then it becomes part of a shared humanity that we all have. And you start to root for the people that are in that story, whether it's your story or their story. And, a good storyteller is just telling the story and not adding too much to it.
Okay, so that's curious. How did you know that you were a good storyteller? Because you are so gifted.
Do not think that I'm a good storyteller. I think that telling it simple. If you think about In a Different Key and the story of Donald Triplett, the first person ever diagnosed with autism, it was his story that was so great. And we let it unfold, built in the book and in the movie. He was the first person ever diagnosed. He grew up in this small town in Forest, Mississippi. The community wasn't so great to him when he was a little boy. And then they embraced him. And then his story, in fact, when he passed away, in 2023, they wrote about him all over the world. Yeah. And that story hadn't been told before we told that story. And that's how stories start to have impact, when you tell the story over and over and over again. But it was Donald's story. It was, and we just gave it the structure and the shape for people to hear it. And it's like they said in Forrest about Donald. It's not us, it's him. I think that's the case of a good story and good journalism, is that you just let the story be what it is.
I think you're being too generous with yourself, having both read the book and seen the movie. I feel like you guys just did a masterful, and that was in 2016 when you and John Donovan, you wrote A Different Key. How did you, I'm sure you get an array of stories presented to you or in your own mind that you want to pursue. What was it about Donald? What was it about his story that attracted you and you knew that it was going to be powerful?
Well, we had been covering autism, for ABC, and you know, John actually, his brother-in-law, has profound autism and lives in Israel, and his mother-in-law had started the first program for autism in Israel, in the early 70s called Dalut, and John was really interested in the history. And we didn't know it was going to be about Donald. We set out to find Donald, but we didn't know we were going to find Donald.
Mm.
Mm. And then we did. And then, the history is amazing. If you look back on where we were then and where we are today. Um, and what they were, the book is just little stories of how we came to be where we are today as the autism community.
Yeah, his story and the way that you and John demonstrated to the viewers of his connections and his community and the power of that is certainly relevant to International Day of Happiness and his joy of travel and his joy of golf. Even if you're not good at golf, you can be joyful
Right.
about golf. So I want to ask you whether Donald or others. So in your kind of conversations with Donald, but families or community members and professionals, how what kind of stories of happiness or well-being stand out for you when you think like on the topic of well-being or happiness of all the stories you've gathered, what stands out?
Oh, Donald. I mean, Donald is the story that everybody dreams of, right? If you're in any way connected to the autism community and you see the life that he had, it's all about community, embracing him. And that's what we want for, everyone on the spectrum, wherever they are on the spectrum, is to be welcomed as part of a community. And Donald's community, they didn't even know he had autism until we came in and sort of told them. He was just Donald to them.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until we really brought that awareness that they had a label for it, and talked about it in terms of autism, because it was just that he was different and the community just accepted him for who he was. And he's the model of, sort of all models. I remember when I was the very first interview I ever did at ABC, I was in my early 20s, and it was of Rosa Parks. And I remember traveling to Detroit and thinking, oh my God, I'm going to interview. And I'm not like, I don't get starstruck or anything, but Rosa Parks, you know,
I mean, that's a name, right? I mean, come on.
that was starstruck for me because I was all
For
about civil
sure.
rights and the underdog and, all of that. And it was her story. Her story had followed her, all these years later. And it was told over and over again. And, she was sort of an inspiration in a way because you could see how impactful a story is in making change. She's the perfect example of it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that when you talked about kind of social justice and change. You shared that your kind of life changed when your son was diagnosed, and that changed, and you wanted were looking for their um, uh, what was that like for you kind of emotionally? I mean, you shared like I was just a mom, and that's always something that's interested me because moms actually changed the world. And as an autism service provider, I can tell you nothing has happened without the advocacy of moms and parents. So can you share just a little bit about like what that was like? Like, oh, I have this other duty to make sure this is represented. Like, what was that like for you kind of emotionally?
Well, I don't think there was any conscious decision to, I'm going to now cover autism. It was, I had a child with autism and I didn't know anything, which meant, and I was a journalist, and not that I knew everything, but, I should have known about this. You always think, well, this is, my
I
kid
should
has
have
this.
known.
Exactly. And, and so it was time for everybody to learn about, what autism is. But it was also the thing that I've seen over and over again in the decades of the autism community, like you said. Parents have changed how we see and how we help, and started schools, and almost everything, with the addition of people like you, right, who are part of that community, has happened because people are committed to it. And there's nothing like a parent than to be committed. And I think that what we do, I used to say this early on, is that if you're good at something, you're something that you really know well, and you can bring that to the table. Well, I was a journalist, so that's what I could bring to the autism community. That's what I had. And so that's what I did. And I don't see it, I never saw it as a choice. I never saw it as I'm giving up something. I think, later in life, when I look back, I was like, oh, how did, it was such, autism is a great story. It's a beautiful story. It's still evolving. And I say sometimes, well, would have been even better if I could have just been watching it from the outside, but it wasn't. It was a story that, that
Personal.
I lived. And I think was, when you say I'm a great storyteller, the reason I disagree is because it's just that I lived it. And so I was able to tell it in a different way. I was able to get people to talk to me in a different way. People knew I was with them. People trusted me. And, you have to earn that trust with people. And I don't think it's the same when you're, as a journalist, you're supposed to tell the story first, and, you know, and take it from there. But I didn't do that, I was a parent first. I always was a parent first, and I was going to protect the families. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh yeah, no, that's so interesting. So I had written this down as how do you like, so when you're telling those stories and you're getting into this right now is um, when you're involving real people and real issues and really people who are quite vulnerable, how do you balance that honesty with care? Like how is it is as I mean, as a mom, are you more capable of that? Like how do you do that?
Well, I think, some of it is, we did this story. We had done a series for Echoes of Autism of some of your young man with Asperger's, and then we went back, and then um, he had tried to kill himself, and
Mm.
we went after we had done the series, and we went back, and he allowed us, after, like, 4 or 5 months, to re-interview him and talk about his experience and what had happened and why it had happened. And it was an incredibly powerful story um, that we were going to share on Nightline. And 2 hours before it was supposed to air, his mother called me and said, I don't think this is a good idea. I'm afraid, if, to put this on, and the feedback and the reaction to his story, what might happen. Is there any way you can, not air this story? And I remember thinking, oh boy,
Wow. There's a
it was,
there's
you
a
know,
challenge.
they spent a lot of money on this story. It's not, from a network's perspective, it was a half-hour show. And I was, you know, but there was no doubt that, I called the executive producer and I said, we can't do this. We just can't do this. And, I think I was also fortunate to have the kind of executive producer who heard it, and it never aired.
Humans first. Humans'
Yeah.
well-being first. Yeah, more important than viewings, or in this day and age, likes and thumbs up and all of those other things. First are the putting. Katie opened the conversation this morning about prioritizing well-being and making sure, and that's a really wonderful example of this human might have been exposed in a way that his family felt was not appropriate.
Right. It
Wow.
could have harmed him. And they thought it was a good idea at the time. And then they thought it wasn't a good idea. And, that's good journalism too, I think, is knowing when not to do the story.
Yeah. That's, when you use the term journalism, and I think I collapse that kind of into storytelling as well.
Mhm.
Um, but can you talk just kind of a little bit about your process? Like, how do you get an idea and it cultivates? And um, I think people really understand the power of story, or maybe you could start there. Why do you think storytelling changes people? Why do you think it's not just data, or like, what is the power of story?
I think it's a little bit what I was saying before is that once someone sees something, they can't unsee it. So if you share that with them, if you allow them to see something that they haven't seen before, now they've seen it, and now they can sort of digest that situation and potentially become part of the solution or part of the larger part of humanity that starts rooting for whatever that story is about, whether it's a person or a thing or a place. You start to care about it, and once you start to care about something, it's that's what stories do. They
Yeah,
open up your heart, right? A good story.
a good story. What have families said to you about a different key?
I'm sorry?
What have families said to you about a different key? Probably in the autism sphere, that's probably your most famous story that we know. What have
Hmm.
families and autistic individuals said to you about a different key?
We've gotten really, beautiful feedback about it. I think because we did try to cover, the how broad it was. And so everyone, at least within the autism community could see themselves in it in a certain way. And they were, proud of where they were. But I think, when you're talking to families and people who have autism, you have to really listen, and you have to listen differently to different people. So if you're talking to a family who has someone with profound autism, that's a different listening skill than somebody who has autism and can talk to you about, you know, who they are. I talk about in a different key. There's a scene in a different key where the whole thing, for people who haven't seen the film, there's this whole scene about my son Mickey, who's obsessed with cats, and he talks about them incessantly, and he meows a lot, and he's meow 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 meow. It's a and at the end of the scene, you see that he really doesn't like them. In fact, he picks up a baby kitten and says, or no, I pick it up because he won't touch it, and says, baby kittens are disgusting. And I'm a neurotypical, right? So I was seeing the cats as his way, that he liked cats, but it wasn't. It was his way of communicating. It was his way of making people laugh. It was his way of connecting.
Connecting.
But you're always learning, right? If you listen. And there's a number of times, even in the film, where I talk about just not having heard Mickey, my son, because I'm not him. And you have, we'll always keep learning. And if we sort of accept and respect and choose to listen, I think we will hear things. But if we just try to hear things from our own perspective, we miss it.
Listening is so present. Even when you read anything about you, you talk about that listening is, and I'd written a question, I think you may have just answered it, but you said that listening is at the heart of good storytelling. And what has listening to autistic individuals and families taught you about how stories should be told?
You have to listen to their experiences,
Yeah.
and then just let that story tell itself, just provide the structure of it, because the passion and the heart comes from the individuals who are sharing their stories. Those are the great stories, or the people who, and the moments that are in the story, not the storyteller. You love the Donald story because of Donald.
And the
And
way you crafted it, and the way you and John crafted it.
Okay, I'll give that to John. I'll give that to John.
I can see his name here. I think he's even on listening. So thanks, John. So yeah, I think I guess what I want, one of the reasons we asked you to be here, Caren, is because we also at Proof Positive value storytelling, and we want people to think about how you craft stories. And you've talked about that you listen, that you protect people's vulnerabilities, that you just let the story emerge on those things. How do you know when you've found a good story? What is it that you're, because you hear like, well, how do you know when it's a good one?
Well, I think, the In a Different Key history is almost a good example, right? We started with an article in the Atlantic. Um, and actually only started with an article in the Atlantic because no one was interested in the book. But the story of Donald got published in the Atlantic, and that, made it so that somebody wanted, once they saw that, they wanted the book. And then the book turned into, for me as a producer's storyteller, I felt like there's this incredible, 600-page book on the history of autism, but not everybody's going to read it. We need to put it in a voice so that other people can hear it. So we produced and that was what I really wanted, to have something that so people could hear it and feel it. And then after the documentary, we decided, well, we could take it to another level, and we created this toolkit, and we broke the film into, 13 different, vignettes, so that people, the police departments, and we talked about race, and we talked about bullying. And so if you wanted to even take the story into, tiny little stories, that the profound autism section, to educate somebody just about that. So I think that, stories can be seen and heard in many different shapes and sizes. And it allows you to, reach so many different people by being able to do that. But I'm not sure if I answered your question.
You did. You did. You also talked about how stories take different form,
Mhm.
right? So, Atlantic, sometimes we think of that as long form, but really a book is much longer form than Atlantic. And then film and video, and just thinking about how storytelling has evolved over your career. And then you talking about wanting to break it down into smaller pieces. I think, um, I also think, I suspect, Caren, it's a little bit innate when you know you have a good story. Like there's something about your nature that you're like, oh, that's a good one. Or I've got that. That's compelling. So, and then I do want to ask you, I am interested in a different key in your storytelling around autism over the years, but you've had an amazing career, right? So and you opened by saying you've, Olympics and Philippines and journalism, but um, can you can you share kind of just what other stories you're telling, what you're working on now? I think people will be really interested in the work that you continue to do and the storytelling that you continue to tell.
Right now I've started working on another documentary. I'm trying to work on it because I'm still raising money for it, but I have started it, and it's the story of it's a lot of stories all wrapped up in one. For people who don't know Barbara Kingsolver, she's a Pulitzer Prize winning novelist, and she wrote this book, Demon Copperhead, which won the Pulitzer. And through her unexpected, downfall of money that came in from the royalties of her book, she decided that she wanted to give back to the community, and she wanted to give back to the community of people who stories she told, in this nonfiction book that was told through the voice of an orphan. And she opened up this program for women, a recovery center called Higher Ground. And we want to tell that story of how people, have hope. And it's not just about addiction. It's also about, a community of people in Appalachia that were targeted by Big Pharma, and how people really don't understand Appalachia and the people of Appalachia, and how resilient they are, and how they help each other to survive and grow and flourish. So we're wrapping all of those stories into one, and I think it's very contemporary, in the sense that we just don't we just don't see people for who they are. We label them, we make fun of them, we take vulnerable communities and we take advantage of them. And so this is a story that's about, resilience and hope with these women, in terms of addiction, but also about, giving, like the giving of Barbara Kingsolver to her community, giving back. It's the most beautiful kind of giving you can do. And she's a major force. And, she grew up in Appalachia. She left for a while, of wanting people to understand, this community that she grew up in, that she thinks is really misunderstood. And, we want to share that as well. So that's a big
project. I wanted you to share that. I was hoping you would describe it. That obviously Barbara Kingsolver, another master storyteller, right?
She's the best of the best.
Yep. So, and those of us who've read her works so appreciate both fiction and nonfiction, but she is a master storyteller. And then you said words in there, Caren, also that apply to all communities of hope, resilience, connection. And I, I think about what you've done and awareness around the autism community and for what we've learned from you, and look at what you could do for yet another vulnerable community that is at times misunderstood, misidentified, doesn't have a voice of its own. And you continue to take that craft of storytelling into the next one. Um, I know we also, Katie Kern on our team is also, I like to call a master storyteller. And I know she has some follow-up questions for you, but I want you to answer this last one that I'm going to pose to you. So kind of looking back on your journey, personally, professionally, can you share one truth about happiness, resilience, or connection that holds importance for you personally?
I think the 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 way to really find happiness is to sort of never give up, to always hope and dream and believe. If you believe you can do it, you'll do it. And I know that sounds very kind of like a fantasy, and to a certain extent it may be, but if you're aiming for that, even just the process of of hope, because it is a process, right? To feel hopeful, you have to do things. And so for me, I think that, happiness is about just, no such thing as the word no. I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna find a way. And sometimes that's a lot easier said than done. And I've been on that side of those things as well. The hard part is to just kind of keep pushing forward, to get there, and to have, I think hope and happiness are really kind of intertwined. And that's actually the one word I would use. I was describing the project I'm working on now. It's about hope. And that's so
Yeah.
much about what you do every day in your organization.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. That I hope is a strong word. I think it gives us opportunity for future thinking. And when Caren, when you agreed to come on here, Katie did a little happy dance because she loves storytelling, and we want to learn from you. And I know, Katie, you had some thoughts or questions as you're listening to Caren that you would love to pose as well.
Yeah, Caren, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to actually start, if I can, with strength spotting. So, at the core of positive psychology is seeing what is right in other individuals. And I was listening to you, and I'm going to acknowledge first that this will be uncomfortable because the first strength I spotted in you was humility. That you are humble to your core, and we appreciate that because it is likely how you let the story unfold. You don't put yourself between the story and telling it. So humility was just sort of palpable as Patricia was trying to give you credit, and you were saying, no, it's the story. But then also hope. Hope is a strength which drives action, is like it's so powerful. And I think in a world and a community that can feel fractured at times, hope is also a strategy, and we have to hang on to it. So I opened this morning by talking about this sort of huge gap between the science of happiness, which in 15 years of World Happiness Reports has never once mentioned the word autism. And the autism community, with billions and billions and billions in funding and research, has yet to mandate happiness as an outcome. And so I am hopeful that there's a story to be told that can bridge that gap. And I guess I would love to just sort of hear you talk about what stories are left to be told in the autism community that will inspire hope, that will inspire sort of a focus on closing the gap so that we really can tell a story that inspires happiness to be sort of moved to the forefront of this conversation.
Oh, so you want me to tell you what the next
Tell us what stories need to be told.
When you're done with the Barbara Kingsolver, come on back.
Okay.
Come on back to the community.
I'm gonna talk to Patricia and we're gonna plan. I already reached out to you about this.
Yes, you did.
Patricia. Okay, so we're going to tell the story that helps close that gap.
Right. But that's, and I felt, and when the last and first time I saw Patricia, even though I feel like I've known her forever, we were talking about how do we, connect what you're doing with what I do to, is it tell another story? You all on your site tell all sorts of stories, but how do you create a bigger message to reach a broader group? And do you find another Donald story, or do you, just focus on, hope and just really direct at that? There's a number of ways to go, and I think, have to decide, if you guys want to focus on that, we should talk about it. But I definitely could not tell you at this very moment what the it is. That's what it is. And that's actually what my colleague and partner, John Donovan, taught me many, many years ago. When you keep asking what the story is, how do you know? You just know when you find the it.
Yep. When you find the it, Caren. Yeah. That's your gift.
No, but you have to have to find it. If you don't find it, you don't have it.
Yeah.
So it's, and and if there isn't an it, there isn't the story. Or there isn't a story that's going to compel people to care about it.
That's exactly the point, right? It's like we can share all the data in the world, and data makes us credible, but stories make it contagious.
Exactly.
And we have to get to our founder's story is profound and inspiring, and in so many ways, what really was the capstone in my career that said, oh, by the way, when the resources are available and the family wants to prioritize happy as the only goal, right? At 10, 11 years old, they had sort of said, look, we've tried the best of the best. We've sought every service we could find. And seemingly, he's getting more and more frustrated. People are not giving value to his voice, right? Like I listened to you talk about listening and giving value to the voice of the individual in front of you. And so when everything was cleared away and I could solely focus on happiness as the only goal and build a team around that and go, we have one goal. What followed was just incredible progress across dozens and dozens and dozens. What followed was a flourishing life. But it took that sort of pausing and going, whoa, what we're doing currently isn't working. Can we just get to the one thing every parent wants for their kids? Happiness.
Right. So that's the thing, when you first have your child, you have a child with autism who gets diagnosed, you want to save them, you want to help them, you want to do everything you can to make it better, right? Because that's a mother's instinct. But once you figure out that that's not what you need to do, what you need to do is just figure out how to make this person that you love have the best, happiest life that they can have. That's when your child will be happy, as opposed to trying to do all those other things, because this is who they are. And so you have to shift. It's not them, it's you. And, life's about happiness.
And all of the different flavors of happiness, how it look, right? Like we have this sort of societal idea that if I can just get that job, if I can just get that partner, if I can just get that house, then I will be happy. And what you're saying is pause see the person in front of you, focus
Listen.
on happiness first. And it's yeah, that flip for people when you go, I don't actually have to fix anything to be happy. I can just choose it in this moment. I can see it. I can have hope that it's here. Um, is powerful.
Yeah. You're both at a macro level when you say you listen to people as a journalist to create stories, and then at the individual level when you're like, I listened to Mickey and he told me what he needed, is so powerful. Caren, I think that Katie talks about that a lot with the individuals with whom she works too. It's like, are you actually hearing them? Are you? And I would imagine when you're working on difficult stories, it takes a minute for people to be honest with you. You're like, oh, I think there's a little bit more there. I think there's a little bit more there because it's a matter of trust that you are going to protect them. They can share those things with you, and you'll be like, oh, maybe we don't want to be sharing that with the public, but can you go at this angle? So,
Yeah, so I think that reasonably so, people, don't necessarily trust you to tell their story the way that they feel their story is in reality. And because that happens a lot.
mhm.
And so again, I think that part of why you think I'm a good storyteller is because I am coming from a different place more often than not. And I think people trust that. And, I had the Kingsolver project also comes from a personal place. And, when I share that I'm connected in some way, all of a sudden the conversation changes. I see that I've seen that more dramatically in this than in autism, because autism, everybody knew that, I was an autism mom. But all of a sudden, a person will be much more comfortable sharing if they know that you understand their pain, or that you understand their
Mm.
struggle, or that you're there to kind of support them and tell their stories so that people will get it. Um, and that they're looking, for the same kind of happiness as everybody else.
And that they deserve
Serve it.
happiness. I mean,
The universal, yeah.
yeah, it's so interesting because many of the 15 years of World Happiness Reports have focused on the inequalities around happiness, just not yet on our community that we care so deeply about, but
Mhm.
age inequality and um,
Gender and yep.
inequality across, sort of different
Race
geopolitical, and yeah, we're not the only gap. And so I
Yep.
love that you're telling a different story and seeing the same. It's like, you know what these women deserve? Happiness,
Yeah. Hope. And
hope.
Caren, you have such a capacity to tell on such a giant stage. So we are grateful for you to be doing that. Katie, did you have other
I
questions?
had I had one other question if we have
Yeah.
time,
Yeah, we
which
do.
is, Caren, you started talking about how you, in the end, saw it sort of in a different key and were able to slice it and dice it and use it for learning. And I think sometimes we think about stories as entertainment, but top of mind for us is skill development, learning, that there is a science and a skill to practicing happiness. And so I would love to sort of know what that experience of taking a story and making it available for learning sort of taught you, what that process was like, and do you start with the story and let it be the learning it is? Can you sort of craft stories for learning? So just a few moments, if you will, on sort of the connection of stories and learning.
Sure. So now I'm probably just going to be speaking from my experience because that's the only experience I have.
Yeah.
In terms of taking, it to a learning stage, because that's not something I've ever done with storytelling before. But I would say that using in a different key as an example, um, is I would want everyone to watch the whole movie first. Because if you just understand one piece of it, then you're just understanding one piece of it. And if you understand the whole thing, and then you break it down into different sections, we have a section on race, and we have questions and interactions that you should have, and conversations, and and then, but they're very bite-sized. So if you're doing it, for you only have an hour. You could just talk about, race, or you could just talk about bullying, or you could just talk about, and we lifted them literally from the film so that people could, watch the whole film and then, break it down. But you don't have to either. If you want to just focus on, you want to show somebody what profound autism looks like and how how dramatic um, people who live that life um, feel sometimes. You can just show them that, and you could use that. I know Judith City, who's the founder of the Profound Autism Alliance, has talked about using that section when she goes to the lobby, so that she could show people this is what we're talking about. You know, and I think that's a really effective way to teach people too, because not everybody has the time or the interest or the compassion, to watch a 90-minute film, just like they're not going to read a 600-page book. But that's with the, the the all the notes and everything. It's not really 600 pages.
Don't be afraid, audience. It is a great book and a great movie.
Much better in paperback. It
Not
doesn't
quite
look
as
like a
heavy.
doorstop.
There's another strength of yours, Caren, is humor. So yeah, it's delightful. Oh my gosh. I do have one closing question. Katie, if you're
Yeah, please.
you've talked about hope a lot, Caren. Can you just close with what brings you hope right now? Can you share with the audience about when you're moving to the future, what makes you hopeful for the autism community, for your family, for your next story, for anything?
That you really have to like dig deep for that one.
We're not surfacey here, Caren. We're not a surface group.
Um, I think that it's that I hope that I can still make an impact in the way that I've had the passion to in the past. And that, that I'll find that, and that this next project might do it, or if not this one, another one, but that I can, that's always what I wanted to do. I wanted to do civil rights. I wanted to fight for the underdog. But there's a difference between sort of putting it out there, and making an impact, where you really can see that, you help bring hope to people, or, inspire them to find hope. So I think that would be, what I kind of hope for in the future, that I can still make an impact, and that my family is happy and healthy and safe.
I'm not going to say anything after that because that is heartfelt. And Caren, I cannot thank you enough. I know you have so many opportunities to engage in purpose and meaning and impact, and we are very grateful here at Proof Positive that you've chosen to dedicate an hour with us and have that time. Katie,
No,
But it
Katie.
sounds like
So, Katie,
hours.
this is the Mutual Admiration Society, because I think of Patricia as like the star of hope in the autism world. So
thanks. I appreciate that, Caren. Um, Katie, just I'll throw it back to you for transition. And we are, oh my gosh, what a wonderful, Katie kicked us off this morning, but you're our first guest. So Caren, we knew you were going to be a star for us. So thank you.
thank you. And I hope the rest of the day is great. I look forward to seeing it.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Caren, thank you so much. I share your admiration for Patricia as well. When Proof Positive was starting, our founders sort of said to me, like, pick a partner. And she was my first phone call because I too had seen her as the hope and the light in the autism community. And here we are a few years in, growing and spreading and doing all of this incredible work together. And now with you to tell this story. So this is great. Up next, we have Taylor, and we're going to shift gears and sort of talk about how can we look at the intersection of technology and well-being and advance a future where happiness is accessible to more through remote technologies that allow us to